Hello there, welcome to this edition of World Panorama, RSTV's weekly show on all the biggest international developments that made headlines this week. I'm Aishwarya Kapoor with you, and here are the top stories. Submitting to mounting pressure and glowing disruption, President Donald Trump accepts deal for temporary end to U.S. shutdown on its 35th day. Warns could shut down again if a fair deal from Congress not achieved. Policymakers, investors and corporate executives brainstorm on pressing global challenges at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos in Switzerland. Express concerns on slow growth of global economy, trade wars and climate change. Many top leaders skip event. U.S. and Venezuela standoff after Washington recognizes opposition's Juan Guaido as the rightful leader of Venezuela. President Maduro cut ties with the U.S., orders American diplomats to leave the country by the weekend. Violent protests across Zimbabwe after President Mnangagwa announces 150% increase in fuel prices. Government facing international condemnation for using troops to quell demonstrations. And Britain's Queen Elizabeth urges the lawmakers to seek common ground over Brexit. After rejecting PM May's draft divorce deal last week, House of Commons to vote on May's Brexit Plan B on Tuesday. The top story, Donald Trump has signed a bill to temporarily end the longest ever partial shutdown of the U.S. government. The bill temporarily opens the federal government for 3 weeks, ending the longest shutdown in U.S. history at 35 days. The White House says that Trump signed the measure after both the Senate and House passed it on Friday, while the U.S. president has backed down from his demand that Congress provide some more funds for the construction of the Mexican border wall. He, however, warned that the government could shut down again if a fair deal from Congress is not achieved.
I think we have a chance, yeah. I think we have a good chance. We're going to work with the Democrats, we're going to see. And if we can't do that, then we'll do, obviously, we're going to do the emergency, because that's what it is. It's a national emergency. These are Hispanic pastors and reverends and ministers, and they understand better than anybody. It's an emergency. It's a humanitarian emergency.
Yes, it is.
And we are going to take care of our border. It's going to be done. And crime is going to go down throughout our whole country, not just at the border. And the border is the least of it. It's what comes in through the border and permeates throughout the whole country. And you're going to see drugs drop way down because a big percentage come in through the border. You will see drugs way down. You're going to see crime go way down. So we're going to do it, and we're doing well, and I really appreciate your being here.
And this week saw the 2019 World Economic Forum's annual meeting taking place in Davos in Switzerland. The annual meeting, running from Tuesday to Friday, attracted world economic leaders to discuss a wide range of topics. But the summit was characterized by discord over momentous issues such as the Brexit and world trade. However, leaders like Angela Merkel and Shinzo Abe pushed for more attention to be paid to countries like India and China that have begun affecting the world economy much more today.
The 49th annual meeting of the World Economic Forum kicked off in Davos, Switzerland on Tuesday with a wide range of topics set to be discussed during its 400 scheduled sessions. Themed Globalization 4.0, Shaping a Global Architecture in the Age of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the meeting was attended by over 60 heads of state or government, 40 international organization heads, and 1,700 business leaders. On the first day of the 4-day forum, the global economy, climate change, technological innovation, and data management were among the most popular areas covered. One of the key issues that was highlighted at the summit was global growth rate. This after the IMF cuts its growth forecast for economic growth, painted a picture of weakening momentum, rising uncertainty and trade tensions.
Looking at the global economy, we are now growing still with a relatively acceptable GDP growth, 3.1 last year, but slowing down. And everybody agrees that there are dark clouds in the horizon and that there are risks. And if one looks at the risks, there is really an interrelation of those risks with all the other aspects of the global international relations.
Another key issue was that of climate change. On the sidelines of the summit, Greta Thunberg, 16-year-old, who has inspired global movement of children skipping school to call for action on climate change, staged a school protest, joined by a handful of local youths. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres also warned the world is running out of time to contain climate change and that more political will is desperately needed.
At places like Davos, people like to tell success stories, but their financial success has come with an unthinkable price tag. And on climate change, we have to acknowledge that we have failed.
At the summit, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe asked world leaders to rebuild trust in the international trading system and urged countries like the US, China and India to breathe fresh life into the WTO. Abe told audience that it was time to rebuild trust in the international trade. His speech comes at a time when the United States is pulling back from free trade and its ongoing trade dispute with China has policy makers and markets concerned. Japan is also set to host the next meeting of G20 in Osaka in June this year. Abe said the meeting would be used to put trade, climate and data governance at the heart of talks between leaders from the world's 20 most industrialized nations.
Now, later this year in June, in Osaka, Japan, we will be hosting this year's G20 summit. Let us make it a chance to regain optimism for the future, providing reassurance that it is possible to achieve a hope-driven economy.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel also addressed the forum and said countries like India and China have begun affecting the world economy much more today and that needs to be taken into account for having a relook at the global trade and financial systems. She also made a veiled attack at protectionist policies being adopted by countries like the US.
Aber es ist ein anderer Ansatz hinzugetreten.
There is a new approach in the world that says, shouldn't we look after our own and ensure that our own are looked after? We should always remember that others have their own interests. Let's call a spade a spade.
In der es allen gut geht.
5G technology development is at its bottleneck and was a hot topic of conversation at the 2019 World Economic Forum annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland. Meanwhile, a very important agreement on global e-commerce market was also signed. China, along with other 75 World Trade Organization members, inked a joint declaration on e-commerce with an aim to launch negotiations on e-commerce within the framework of the WTO. The agreement will encourage all WTO members to join in the negotiation so as to help e-commerce bring about more benefits to consumers across the globe and businesses. This year's annual meeting at Davos, which attracted more than 3,000 leaders from the areas of politics, business and academia, as well as non-governmental organizations, took place in the absence of many major political figures who were busy trying to solve issues at home. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And the US and Venezuela have been locked in a tense international standoff as the Trump administration kept its embassy staff in the country despite an official order to eject them. Venezuelan President Maduro cut ties with the US and ordered American diplomats out of the country by this weekend. This after Washington recognized Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido as the rightful head of Venezuela. However, the international community is still divided on whether to recognize his government.
It all started with these protests. snowballing into major standoff between Venezuela and the United States. Hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans poured into the streets of Caracas on Wednesday to demand an end to the government of President Nicolas Maduro. The rally followed dozens of violent protests and looting overnight that left 4 people dead. Maduro has led the country since 2013 and was sworn in for a second term earlier this month. His re-election in May 2018 was marred by an opposition boycott and vote-rigging claims. The president has faced ongoing criticism, international and internal opposition for his human rights record and handling of the economy.
Maduro, your time is up. Yours and your cabinets. Understand it. Sir, Venezuela has outgrown you. Understand it. Venezuela has outgrown you.
Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido then declared himself interim president, winning over the backing of Washington and many Latin American nations. U.S. President Donald Trump publicly backed Guaido as the legitimate leader of Venezuela. Apart from the US, more than a dozen Latin American countries as well as Canada and the UK have backed his claim. But Russia has condemned foreign support to Guaido, saying it violated international law and was a direct path to bloodshed. China, Mexico and Turkey also back Maduro.
The time for debate is done. The regime of former President Nicolas Maduro is illegitimate. His regime is morally bankrupt. It's economically incompetent, and it is profoundly corrupt. It is undemocratic to the core. I repeat, the regime of former President Nicolas Maduro is illegitimate. We therefore consider all of its declarations and actions illegitimate and invalid.
President Nicolas Maduro responded by quickly severing diplomatic ties with the US and gave US diplomats 72 hours to leave the country.
I have decided to break diplomatic and political relations with the imperialist government of the United States. Out of Venezuela they go. Enough interventionism. There is dignity here. Here there are people to defend this land.
Meanwhile, US is also looking to block Maduro's revenue streams and rather working on a plan to funnel funds to opposition leader Guaido. Guaido has said he would consider an amnesty for President Nicolas Maduro if he cedes power. But Venezuelan defense minister said that the country's military was with Maduro and will continue to recognize Maduro as the legitimate president of the country.
I alert the people of Venezuela that a coup is being carried out against the institutions, against our democracy, against our constitution, against our president Nicolas Maduro, the legitimate president of the Bolivian Republic of Venezuela.
The deadline Maduro gave for the US to remove its staff from its embassy would expire in the afternoon on Saturday. A refusal to evacuate would test Maduro's reaction and whether he'd be willing to use force to try to expel them from the country, which could in turn trigger a strong reaction from the US, including tougher sanctions. The US has also been preparing possible oil sanctions, and Trump says that he would not even rule out military options. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television.
And Zimbabwean government has been facing international condemnation as its forces have been accused of engaging in a systematic torture of protesters who carried out demonstrations over high fuel prices. Zimbabwe's President Mnangagwa cut short his overseas trip after the deadly crackdown on protesters in the African country. Now, human rights groups say that at least a dozen people have been killed and hundreds have been detained following days of unrest. Zimbabwe President Emmerson Mnangagwa going through testing times. His government is facing international condemnation for using troops to quell demonstrations. Unrest broke out more than a week ago following a sharp rise in fuel prices. Reports have emerged of assaults allegedly carried out by the military in various parts of the capital, Harare.
The use of live ammunition by security forces was used. Excessive force was used. We don't have verification of the exact number of people who were killed or injured, but there are doctors' associations that are putting numbers out there, like more than 60 people were treated in hospitals for gunshot wounds. This is not the way to react to the expression of economic grievances by the population.
Zimbabwe's Human Rights Commission also alleged that following the protests, security forces instigated systematic torture of residents.
Complainants and witnesses who spoke to the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission highlighted that armed soldiers and police visited their homes starting in the evening of Monday, 14 January 2019. They reported a heavy crackdown characterized by indiscriminate and severe beatings.
Zimbabwe's main opposition party, Movement for Democratic Change, says several of their leaders remain in hiding and that security forces raided their homes at night and beat up suspected protesters.
It's very unfortunate and very tragic that we are back to the past. What is clear is that it's total victimization on the basis of freedom of conscience. So we are having all these MDC members, MPs being victimized.
Ivan Maware, a pastor who rose to prominence as a critic of former Zimbabwe leader Robert Mugabe, is among those detained and faces a possible 20-year prison sentence on subversion charge. Maware's lawyer said that more than 400 people have been denied bail and described the case against his client as a travesty of justice.
We thought we had a new country and a new way of doing things. None of what I am being accused of is what I have done at all. I did nothing of the nature. But if we have true justice in this country, then let's see it at play.
In further trouble for Zimbabwean government, a court ruled that Zimbabwe's government exceeded its mandate in ordering an internet blackout during civilian protests. President Mnangagwa had to break off a trip to Europe to deal with the continuing unrest. In a series of tweets, he said that violence or misconduct by security forces was unacceptable and a betrayal of the new Zimbabwe, adding that if required, heads will roll. However, he blamed the sanctions imposed on his country for the economic collapse.
Zimbabwe has gone through severe economic sanctions and isolation for now nearly 2 decades. As a result of those severe economic sanctions imposed by the West on us, they collapsed our currency in 2009.
Mnangagwa announced a steep increase in the fuel price earlier this month, which triggered a 3-day strike during which protesters barricaded roads with rocks and burnt tires in the capital, Harare. In the second city of Bulawayo, shops were looted. Police rounded up 600 people, including Maware and an opposition legislature, in a crackdown on protesters. The protests pose a major challenge for Mnangagwa, who promised to repair the creaking economy after he replaced longtime leader Robert Mugabe, ousted in November 2017 coup. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. And Britain's Queen Elizabeth has sent a message to Britain's factious political class over Brexit, urging the lawmakers to seek common ground and resolve the crisis. With the clock ticking down to 29th of March, the date set for Britain to leave the European Union, the UK is grappling with how or even whether to exit the European Union. After rejecting Prime Minister Theresa May's Brexit draft deal last week, Britain's Parliament will again try to find a way through Brexit on Tuesday.
Members of the British government, including Finance Minister Philip Hammond and Trade Minister Liam Fox, braving Brexit questions from businessmen and journalists as they headed to Davos to attend the World Economic Forum. British businesses are deeply concerned by the government's refusal to rule out a no-deal Brexit, which would entail lengthy delays for cross-border trade.
I don't want to see a no-deal Brexit, and we're working very hard to avoid one. There's a majority in Parliament already expressed against a no-deal Brexit. What we now need to do is persuade a majority in favour of a deal that will ensure that we can leave and deliver on the referendum result, but do so in an organised, orderly way that supports the economy.
Britain is due to leave the European Union on March 29th, and the last week, lawmakers voted by a historic margin to block the deal which Prime Minister Theresa May had agreed with Brussels, putting the country on course for an exit without a deal. While the British government is working hard to avoid no-deal situation, the entire world is concerned. The issue reverberated at the World Economic Summit in Davos.
There are a series of logistical issues that need to be solved, and it's quite transparent that in many cases they're not. So port infrastructure is not there, border infrastructure is not there, to the extent that it would need to be for jumping from an absolutely seamless trading environment to one with frictions.
Honourable gentlemen.
Back home, Prime Minister Theresa May continues to seek support for her Brexit deal, ahead of a crucial Commons vote on Tuesday. Last week, the withdrawal deal negotiated with the EU was rejected by MPs by a historic margin, 432 votes to 202. The Prime Minister is hoping to tweak her deal to address the concerns of Ireland border with issue. So far, 14 amendments have been proposed, though more may be added. The key amendment is one asking British Parliament to allow time to pass a bill that would try to avoid a no-Brexit deal.
The no-deal scenario would be a very bad idea for the British economy. I think it's highly unlikely because there's a big majority in Parliament against it, and there are even several cabinet ministers who would not support it. So I think it's highly unlikely, but not impossible. And if it happened, it would be extremely bad for sure.
There is also an amendment to extend Article 50 that seeks to delay to Britain's departure from the EU beyond the March 29th cut-off date until December 31st. However, May says delaying Brexit did not address the underlying decision about how Britain should leave the European Union.
What we have seen is amendments seeking to engineer a situation where Article 50 is extended. Now, that does not solve the issue. There will always be a point of decision, and the decision remains the same. No deal, a deal, or no Brexit. I'm delivering on Brexit. I want to do it with a deal. Why won't he come and meet me and talk about it?
Planned by a group of Tory and Labour MPs to table an amendment on another EU referendum have been dropped after they admitted they didn't have sufficient backing from MPs. It will be up to Speaker to select amendments to put to vote. Indeed, after Brexit Plan A failed to get Parliament's approval, the last word on Brexit Plan B is not out as yet. Queen Elizabeth, in an annual speech to her local Women's Institute in Norfolk, also urging Britain's factious political class to see common ground and grasp the big picture to resolve the crisis. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And finally, an elephant in Coimbatore city has become the center of attraction for visitors coming to an elephant rejuvenation camp as it plays a mouth organ. The rejuvenation camp is being attended by elephants from across Tamil Nadu, where they are provided with nutritious food items, relaxation exercise and medical care. Now, elephant Lakshmi plays the mouth organ for 15 minutes on a daily basis. So take a look at elephant Lakshmi playing the mouth organ and grooving to its tune as I take your leave. I'll see you next week with another edition of World Panorama. Bye-bye.